Today, I'm joined by a very special guest because this is a conversation I have been planning for quite some time. Bruce Scheer joins me. Bruce is the author of Inspire Your Buyers, and we're going to go deep into the book that is really resonating with marketers all over the planet. And we're going to find out from Bruce the framework behind the book, his backstory, and a whole host of other things that are going to help you to sell the sizzle. Welcome to the episode, Bruce.
Thank you, Neil. I'm excited to be with you and your audience. This is going to be great.
It is. And this is something we've been hatching this plan to talk about this book for quite a while. And you've been busy jetting off here, there, and everywhere. CES last week. You're a very busy man.
Hey, man, that's how we like to roll, enjoying life through that process, moving around and being stimulated by so many different things, clients. And oh boy, CES last week, Neil, your audience is going to hear me have a little bit of I brought back more than just good memories. So that's why I might sound a little bit odd until you run me through Adobe's AI audio enhancer technology. But I will sound a little bit funny, but anyway, some of the trials and tribulations on being on the road.
Absolutely. And it's a price we have to pay, isn't it, for the latest technology, for these innovative ideas and things. But, this is not new stuff to you, is it, Bruce? I mean, you are a seasoned professional who's kind of practiced your art now in the sales sphere, if we could call it that, for, many, many years now. What kind of drew you to sales? Because it clearly is, from when you hear Bruce talk and when you see Bruce's work, you just know this is a thoroughbred salesperson who just lives and breathes salesmanship at the highest possible level through and through. When did you kind of first know that sales was your thing?
Well, boy, Neil, I've been focused on sales and business development and specifically consulting for my whole career. I tell people jokingly, I've never worked. I just have fun doing client gigs. And, I touch many clients every year. And the beauty around that is I'm just having different experiences. And it forces, and I jokingly tell people my clients pay me to read. My clients pay me to learn, because I got to learn about them and I got to figure out, hey, what's the best go-to-market strategy? So it's strategic. But then how do we go to market in terms of being compelling, both from a marketing and a sales side? I've personally played the role of founder, CEO, CMO, and often if it's an early stage company or startup, I'll be an acting CMO. But I'm more of a kind of a performance CMO, where it's all about sales. And I'm typically working in the B2B space, and it's normally a complex solution or a big ticket item or both. And it's a nut to crack. How do we help customers and our buyers, get convinced that this change is necessary and they're willing to make the investment in time, money, and energy and career risk typically to move forward with one of my clients' solutions. So I've been doing that for, I'll show you a little bit some of the clients that I've worked with and for. Let me share that with you guys. So you'll see a number of different, top tier logos there, large enterprises. But I've been doing, kind of go-to-market sales enablement effectiveness work for these guys before the word sales enablement even existed. So my whole career.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously being startup chief exec, CMO, but actually having this kind of, I guess, sort of, angled from a sales perspective, a very commercial kind of focus. You've, I guess, been bridging the gap between sales and marketing for many, many years, because often in a lot of organizations, large, medium, and small, there's this chasm between sales and marketing where they're not necessarily talking the same language. They don't necessarily see eye to eye, almost that you could argue they've got different objectives. When have you seen that play out really well, where actually sales and marketing are playing to a single kind of end game or a single goal?
Oh gosh, one of my favorite success stories of where this really worked out is, and some of the ingredients for it to work out is, I'm typically working with the revenue leader, whatever they might call themselves, chief revenue officer, chief sales officer. They've got a mandate. They've got to sell. They've got to hit revenue targets. Otherwise, they lose their job, which often happens. So talk about a pressure cooker for most of my clients, and that are bigger. And then if it's a smaller organization, I'm typically working directly with the founder and or CEO, who's responsible for sales and hitting revenue targets and growing that business successfully. And so when I've got the right stakeholders on the bus, we can break down that divide, that barrier between marketing and sales. Doesn't happen very often, though. Very often I see in larger organizations really distinct stovepipe departmental activity. Marketing does this, sales does that, and it's super sad. And it's a travesty. But when it does go well, one of my favorite success stories here locally, where I live in the Seattle area, a company called Tableau. They sold themselves off to Salesforce.com. And all my clients are multimillionaires right now, and enjoying life on the beach, and also many of them are still working because they love the work they do. But in that instance, I was brought in, and I was building a sales narrative, and my initial mandate is they were trying to get into enterprise accounts and make enterprise sales. And if you've heard the term, they started off with a product-led growth strategy, where giving a free trial and somebody could download it and play with it in their department, and then take it to their boss and get their whole team using it, and then it would kind of spread across the organization with that product-led growth. But part of their strategy was, hey, that's not good enough, it's not fast enough, and we want to sell to bigger accounts. How do we do that? And so they brought me in to craft a narrative for them, a sales narrative. And in so doing, I had the revenue leader, and I had the vice presidents of sales, and I had their CMO, all of us really tight with that mandate. What's our go-to-market story? And it really, really worked exceptionally well. So well that it just became mandatory training for everybody across the whole company. I had people in product groups going through it, customer success groups, it became a whole company story. And, all the way up to the chairman. And then it became part of new hire training. This is our story. This is our narrative. So everybody coalesced with that, which made it really powerful. Extremely rare for that to occur, and for me to have that type of stakeholder connection in these large accounts. Again, it's typically a divide. And another time, an enlightened CMO, he went on to be CMO of Citrix, but the company before, it was really sad. I built a sales narrative for the sales organization, and I showed it to the CMO at the sales kickoff event. He loved it, and then he put corporate marketing on hold and had them redo everything around that new narrative. Just like a year and a half ago, I did one for a company called Fiserv. They offer technology to banks, and it was more their digital banking story. And they invited me in they'd hired another a marketing agency to do the standard messaging map and some of the beautiful research that went around that, but they didn't have a story. And that's where I came in to add my value, working with that agency, getting their inputs, and then crafting that go-to-market narrative and introducing that to the sales organization. Here's the story we want to tell.
There's a powerful phrase that you use there, which I'd like to kind of try and unpick here, which was the whole company narrative. Now, that to me is really quite intriguing, because kind of going back and paraphrasing my initial question, which was, how do you kind of broach this chasm between sales and marketing? But you've extended it here by saying, well, actually, no, it's the rest of the organization too, because they'll all have their own perspective. They'll all be talking from their own kind of, position, if you like, and their own discipline. It gets really confusing, doesn't it, then, for the outside stakeholder, be it a customer or supplier or anybody in the outside world, to kind of really understand what you guys are talking about, because because you've all got this subtle difference. There has to be one whole company story, doesn't there?
It's typically not even a subtle difference, as you say. It's normally wildly divergent. Adobe acquired a company that I did some work for, and jokingly, Neil, I always say that, I interviewed 10 executives and I got 10 distinctly different answers on what their story was. So very often it's not close. It's even, disparate, wildly different. So, big issue. Neil, I wanted to introduce a concept that's not in the book, but maybe I think your audience will probably love it in terms of the importance for everybody to understand your go-to-market, your sales narrative. It's a concept that another colleague of mine in the past coined, called doer seller. At the end of the day, everybody's a salesperson. Even that Tableau story I told you, this woman in learning and development that was organizing the workshop so we could introduce the sales narrative and also get people to practice with it. We even had people whiteboarding that narrative so they could inculcate that, start to build that into their memory and body, what that story was. And so she, of course, was observing the whole thing, but she shot me a note. She goes, Bruce, I was down in Vegas and, one of our prospects was there at this event and I sketched out our story and he's buying from us now. It's like, awesome. She's not carrying a sales bag. She's in a learning and development function, but yet selling the business, and that's the concept for that is doer seller. Some of the most important people to roll out your narrative to would be customer success, especially if you want recurring revenue and want to keep those customers. You need, your customer success people really being a master in that story and helping everybody understand, that North Star around that story that you have.
And it's a shared passion then, isn't it, really? Because I can imagine then an organization doing this with every discipline, just feeling it and embracing it and embodying it. If it's a very, very powerful story or narrative or proposition, so all of the above, is included here, people just will get it, won't they?
On that point that you're making about the power of a narrative, I was working with the president of McKesson Technologies before McKesson hived that off for themselves. And so they've gone through a few different manifestations, of course, how technology companies do. But at that time with that president, it was so cool. He had trusted me in the past. And he just said, hey, Bruce, you and I was working with an enlightened CMO at that time. The president said, hey, you make the story you want us to tell. I'll make it happen internally. And so it wasn't just a story, putting lipstick on something. He had to fundamentally change their offerings to support our story. And it fostered a partnership, a deeper partnership between McKesson and Microsoft at that point in time because of the story we wanted to tell.
Now that's really interesting. So what you're advocating there with that example then, was the question, because otherwise I was going to make a statement. It's a question here. Is it story first? So story comes first and then everything else kind of infills behind? Or is it that you collect together all of your competencies, your assets, the kind of propositions that have gone before, and then you craft the story in that direction by taking the best bits? Kind of which way round is it? I want this to be really practical for everyone. Is there a better way round?
Oh, yeah. The better way is, I would argue, story first. That's the strategic narrative, and then everything fits within that canvas, that structure, if you would. But what's normal is, hey, we're going to market, or hey, Bruce, we're in market, and our story sucks. And then you're trying to put lipstick on something, and then that creates consternation, and and it's a bit of a rough trudge through the mud, because hey, the horses are already out of the corral, as one of my clients said. How do we deal with it? But ideally, ideal world, there's strategic thought that goes into things in advance with great intention, and then we build and design for that story we want to tell. not very, that in the real world, that doesn't play out that often.
And you can imagine that being almost the textbook way of doing it for a startup. You begin with the story first, then you start to roll out your capability. But even there, it's
But
really
normally,
unlikely to
your
happen
founder
because
in
a
a
lot of it's
startup is a
tech, isn't it?
the founder in a startup's a technologist and has a great
Mm.
idea for technology around the problem he thinks he had or she had, and then tries to push that out. Hey, here's the answer. Here's the answer. And that's no way to sell, both through marketing and selling. You lead with the problem that you're trying to solve for to the right buyer. And however, here's something that you might find interesting, Neil. One of my old clients became head of strategy for Office 365 for Microsoft. And he was forcing his product engineers, to go through storytelling training. Because as they were looking at functionality and how to enhance, he wanted the story behind it versus just the technology path.
Isn't that
I want
interesting?
that story, that buyer-centric story.
And it takes you out of yourself, doesn't it? That's the thing. This is not something that is nuts and bolts, widgets, or features, and it's not even benefits here. This is something way beyond features and benefits. This is kind of a real narrative. It's outcomes. It's changing the world, even, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was just talking to a guy last night. He was trying to get my feedback on his narrative, and he's trying to improve leadership in organizations. And his solution name was very, self-centric. If you look at my model, target the right buyer, show or spotlight the big problem, envision the outcome with that buyer, and then you need to showcase the solution in all its glory, and then prescribe next steps. So that's the core framework within the book. But with him, he was calling the solution, I think it was leader or first leader system, and then he trademarked it. And I'm like going, okay, that's the solution name for you. That's your offering name. But if we were to be buyer centric, what would the solution name be? And then that brought forward a lot of different brainstorming. And then it ended up being, it would be leadership, new leadership without risk. That's really the solution to help, that organization to have sustainable growth, of solving that problem of just-in-time leadership, where or reactive ad hoc leadership. Somebody leaves, now we need to fill that position. Let's raise somebody up to their level of incompetence, which is normal and hurts everyone. So he wants to move them from there to be more sustainable and have more sustainable growth. How to do that? Create more leadership opportunity without the associated risk. And then I've got this offering and services and this and that that's going to make that possible. So very buyer centric in how you approach things like that.
So we've constantly sort of talked a little bit about the book. This, everybody, is the book. It's Inspire Your Buyers, and having read now cover to cover this book, it's masterful. I think that is probably the word I could sort of use, which kind of sums this up. I mean, I've been in marketing and sort of business development roles for what feels like forever, and this is a moment in certainly my reading career, if we could call it that, where suddenly, just for a moment, there was a beauty and simplicity, because a lot of the kind of the text, the narratives, and the teachings around this kind of stuff go super deep into the psychology. They get really heavy in terms of traditional theories. But Bruce's book, and I want to go into this with you, Bruce, because it's the simplicity of the model that gives the power to the model. So take us a little bit deeper into both, what your kind of framework is about, but also kind of some of the motivations between each of the steps. Because I'd love for people, until they actually get a hold of a copy of this, and we'll put obviously the links to the book in the episode notes below. But I want to kind of give them a flavor of the journey through the model to selling the Sizzle, through inspiring your buyers.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen, I've got a couple of visuals that would illustrate that for everybody. Neil, you could come back a little bit. I don't know how we do that and keep you in. But with the book, Inspire Your Buyers, Go to Market with a Story That Sizzles. It's kind of funny, Neil. I wanted this book to sizzle, and therefore I didn't want to make a big fat book like I normally receive from others. 70,000 words, 50,000 words. I think that a business book these days is anywhere from 25,000 words to 50,000 words, and many of them tip over that. Very few underneath, and there's this belief that you have to have a certain amount of heft. And I'm so grateful that somebody whispered in my ear, Bruce, write a book that your target audience, and for me, I work with business executives, that they could read in the course of a flight. So here's two business executives / friends sending me photos, unprompted photos of them reading my book on the course of a flight. Mission accomplished. Very, very cool. But the whole genesis of this book, it started with me being stuck on an island during the pandemic. And I had enough time and energy and desire to write a book that somebody could read in the course of a flight. Or recently, a friend of mine used to be head of Disney Consumer Products for Asia. He read it in the course of a doctor's office visit, being stuck in the waiting room. So it's not a lot, it's simple, but I jokingly tell people, Neil, light on calories, rich in nutrients. And because it's to use a phrase that one of my friends loves to use, it's deceptively simple and mastered by few. So the core framework, I'll illustrate that, Neil, and then please come back and ask me questions. But it's a 5-step model, and it starts with number one. Before you do anything in crafting your go-to-market narrative that sizzles, you need to identify your target buyer. And when I work with organizations, boy, oh boy, do we, gnash teeth and try to figure out who that is, and multiple opinions, etc. But what I'm trying to understand is, what organization are we targeting for, where we're going to get the most traction and hit our revenue numbers that we're accountable to. So where are we going to get our traction? What types of accounts or organizations or opportunities, and then who within the account are we targeting? Who's typically the business decision maker amongst the 6 to 20 people that are involved in the decision making process, depending on the solution. And so we got to figure all that out. So that's one chapter in the book. How do you target the right buyer? Then from there, we want to spotlight the big problem, is what I call it. Because typically the decision makers that we're selling to, they're concerned about big things, not little things. So what's the big problem that we're framing for them that they agree with? Yeah, guilty as charged. I've got that problem. And I know that because I have all these other, symptoms and challenges and everything else. But yeah, the central ugly dilemma that I have, that's my big problem. So I'm really trying to, and I use the metaphor, Neil, of a spotlight, because I want to, don't talk about solution, don't talk about anything else, don't talk about me. I'm just talking about you and your problem, putting all the focus and all the attention on that. Hence the metaphor of a spotlight. It lights everything else up in its circle. Everything else is in darkness. And if I always contend, if you don't have agreement with your prospect that they have a problem to solve, cancel future meetings and move on. You're wasting everybody's time. And so nail the problem first. Then from there, and we talk about envisioning the outcome. So when that problem goes away and we move forward together, what can we expect? What's the desired outcome? And you can work with your prospect to envision what that outcome will be. And so, in the book, I talked about John Chambers, former chairman of Cisco, how he grew it from millions to billions when he was there. I asked him for his number one piece of sales advice, and he said, sell outcomes, don't sell products. So that's where this comes in. That's the aspirational state, getting everybody excited for change. Hey, not only are you going to get out of hot water, that horrible problem state that you're in, you get to go to this future state that's just absolutely fantastic, your wildest dream. And then if you have agreement there, these 2 points, problem and outcome, if you have an agreement on both, then you can start to ease in, well, how do we get there? What's our solution? And I call that showcase the solution. Now let's look at it in all its beauty and the awards it's won and everything else in terms of that approach. Why is it so awesome? And then if they love that, then we move on to prescribing next steps, typically stated by, hey, this has been a great conversation that we've had. Based on my experience in this conversation, here's the next steps. And that's part of a beautiful sales narrative. So again, just to summarize, 5 key components: target the right buyer, then spotlight the problem, envision the outcome, showcase the solution, and then prescribe next steps. That can be on the website. And then also it should be infused into those selling conversations as the core narrative of that selling conversation. Neil, over to you.
Wow. Well, that is, quite some summary of the book. I mean, yeah, that's really, really inspiring, I think, for a lot of us who need that kind of clarity of the step by step. And there's a couple of questions that I've got which come directly from the way that you couched that. And the first one is to do with this kind of spotlighting. So if, again, B2B, I know you're super experienced in B2B sales. In B2B sales, obviously, you have a number of different, let's say, influencers in the purchasing decision. So you might have the budget holder, you'll have an influencer, you might have the end user of this, you have other people kind of pitching into the decision process. How much is it then important to be almost creating lots of different spotlights? Do you have to change the story for each of the individual target audiences, even in one particular customer?
Yeah, you use a kind of a strong word, change the story. And very often I'll have, I'm working with a founder in his company. It's a business to government company, and having a lot of fun with these guys. They were responsible when the US government shot down the Chinese balloon. If you ever saw that, Neil, they had data and a report on every decision maker's table minutes after that occurred. Here's how, why, when, answering all those questions of why we took that action, why that happened. So anyways, they do some really cool intelligence work. But even they were looking at, hey, we want to sell into all these different sectors. Don't we need different stories? And the buyers in these sectors very often are different. Do we need a separate story for every buyer? And the answer is no. If you do that, you're going to create confusion. So normally what you'll do, and I did this, I don't know if you're familiar with the company Alcatel-Lucent. I feature them in the book for this reason. Do we have to craft all these different stories? When I started working with them, I think they had 146 products. And when I was done, they had 4. We crafted a central narrative, but then we characterized it, we tailored it for different verticals. And then the sellers using it would tailor it for the different buyers, the different roles that they were selling into. But the narrative was a narrative. It was a standard thing, and it didn't vary all that much.
So is there the way you're describing that then? So there's almost like a local translation when you're face to face with a particular individual and you're using the story, you're almost giving them permission to say, okay, well, you can kind of tune it based on their kind of feedback that they give or they might want a specific element that goes into supporting the story. They might want some extra evidence or something like that. So you can kind of customize it at a gentle level. It feels like there's a little bit of flex in there, but the overarching story has to remain. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, we'll teach sellers how to make magic in those moments, because at the end of the day, with your buyer, you're actually trying to co-construct the problem and the outcome and the solution. It's a very engaging, interactive dialogue, and you'll see that I make point of that in the Sizzles model that's in there. How to have your narratives, make sure your narrative sizzles. A framework around that. But you do want to be engaging in those dialogues and be co-constructive on the problem, outcome, and solution and next steps. Now, off a website, you can still have your central narrative. And very often you'll see something like that in an about section of the website. But very often you'll see who we serve, and you'll click on the vertical that you're associated with because you're interested. And then you can tailor the narrative there using the language of that sector, so it lands a little bit better. So it's not just the selling conversation. You can tailor it, from some in part of the marketing assets, et cetera. The content marketing that's done, you can make different executive briefs or white papers for different audiences, and tailor. But the value of it is to hold on to that central nature of the narrative. It makes life so much more simple for everybody.
So from marketing speak, it would be things like brand guidelines is a big thing that's often bandied around. But these are kind of story guidelines, aren't they? This is your core central kind of theme. And then you, as a sales professional or marketing professional, learning and development professional, in your example a little bit earlier in our conversation, you can then sort of take that and then you can make it relevant to the person you're face to face with. That feels there's a real kind of confidence builder here. You're not going to be going out there sort of untethered or rudderless. You're going out there with a very clear, almost brief that you're taking out to the world. And that must be great for people, particularly if they're new to an organization. Maybe, they've been in position for maybe a few months and they're now facing these kind of senior executives that they're looking to sell to. You've got then the confidence that, hey, I've got a story that I know works. Okay, in the moment, I might tailor it to your particular need, but I can go in now with confidence. That's a great emotive thing, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. And I'm constantly getting the feedback from newer reps, locally in my world. I was working with a company called Concur, and they were acquired by SAP in the travel and expense space for several $1 billion. Those founders really did well. But with the reps, a lot of times the content I make will live online. And I had instances of reps just camping on that content and seeing the analytics around that. And normally when this all goes well, it just becomes part of onboarding for any new rep, and where they get the story and they're ready to go. But most organizations don't offer that. They're product centric in their onboarding. Here's the product. Here's how the technology works. You need to understand these details, so you can answer questions around the product and be credible around the product. Now that's true to a certain degree, but that's way later in the buying cycle when you're talking to people that care about that. The influencers of the buying decision that are kicking tires and stress testing, and you need to get into some of those conversations, the demos, et cetera. But it's not the same as the central narrative that you would have that executives will care about.
So just for clarity for me, really, and I'm guessing for maybe some people listening, then this is the way to build a relationship, because you can't build a relationship on product features, can you? If you're in that conversation, nobody's going to say, oh yeah, Neil, you were amazing the way you talked about that product. But if I tell them a story, there's an opportunity for them to kind of feel like, oh, this is a real person. I could actually get into a professional relationship with this person. It takes things out of the kind of the commodity selling sort of, field of chaos, doesn't it, into something that's really quite special. It's a real differentiator, this, if you get it right, isn't it?
Yeah, hence why I use the word sizzle. The origins of that, Neil, when I coined that title, I was thinking about, what sizzles. And so if you're in a Mexican restaurant, if you ever go to one, when somebody comes out with a plate of fajitas, everybody kind of turns because they can hear it. And and they're like, oh, damn, wish I would have ordered
You
that.
like that, yeah.
That looks good. And that's what I'm trying to get to with that sales story or that central narrative, just something that sizzles. It's unique. And so when you talk about relationship, I think about a differentiated buying experience. So there's data on this, but most buyers, especially senior buyers, they or decision makers, economic business decision makers, they most often feel incredibly underwhelmed by if they do get involved in those selling conversations. They're low level, and as you said before, they're product centric, feature function, benefit centric, and low level, and very very often there's little to no value to them, and a waste of time. And it's a sad thing because the cost of an executive per hour, it might be up to $10,000 an hour of time that seller wasted, of that executive's time, what the organization's paying for. So how can you meet their expectations? You need to have a compelling narrative, one that sizzles, that has insight within that. They learned something they didn't know before they had an interaction with you. It's an interaction that would have been so good, they would have gladly paid for it.
Is that the differentiator then? I mean, I'm just thinking from a
That's what makes
practical
it sizzle.
sense.
Executives don't need
Yeah.
friends. I mean, they got enough golfing buddies, etc. But what's the centricity on the value creation in that dialogue?
There's a
Are you
great
speaking their language? And there's
indicator here.
three key components, Neil. If you're selling to buyers, I call it the heart, the cog, and the money symbol. Have you ever heard the phrase "people buy on emotion and then they justify with logic"?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
that narrative, that is the emotional component. You got to stick that narrative, where they emotionally want to change. And then you can help them rationalize it with the cog. How are they going to change operationally? And can they see that? How their current way of doing things is broken. And then how the new way is going to be fundamentally different. I know you talk on AI quite a bit for your audience, and good for you, taking people into the future. But that's pre-post. How are they doing things now without AI? Can you see how that's going to die? But here's what it looks like with it, AI infused. It's fundamentally different and awesome. So you got to help them, see that. And I call that the cog. How do things change, that way operationally? And then the money sign. Where's the real business value in making that change? So if you can nail the three of those, heart, cog, and money symbol, then you're onto something, and that customer's probably going to buy from you. Make that investment.
Yeah, and I love that point, and I didn't want this to go by without everybody really kind of hearing this one. I love the point you make there about it needs to be at a level where somebody would actually have paid you for that sizzle, or paid you for that moment, paid you for that intelligence or information, because that is such a key performance indicator, isn't it, as to we are actually doing this right now. If you feel when you're crafting a message that this is so good that somebody would actually pay to hear this, then you're onto something, don't you? Because I think a lot of people, they would say, oh yeah, well, we love our messages. We've got some great marketing, we've got some great propositions. We're doing a little bit of this. Don't know if it's up to Bruce's standard, but we're kind of doing okay. And they're actually paying lip service to it. They're not really pushing the boundaries. I think what you're advocating, Bruce, if I'm right, is this has to be so good that people would actually pay to have this sales meeting with you. That sets a whole new bar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
So exciting. I think
there's
a real challenge here to everybody.
When I ask a revenue leader, hey, would people pay to meet with your reps? And
Mm.
And then you're into that low grade, persistent chasing, spamming, all that yuckiness, devoid of insight and value versus really showing up, buyer first to help create that value.
That's critical, isn't it? The other thing I wanted to touch on with you in this kind of model, the various steps, and I know people who obviously are going to get a copy of the book, they're going to follow this through step by step to get to this final one. But you talked then about the next steps, the taking action. How does that kind of play out with this narrative, this storytelling? Is there a certain pattern of kind of next steps that naturally fall out of this? Because I'm quite curious as to, if we've built everything up to being this incredible story, everyone's like, oh, waiting for the punchline, or, oh, they want to get part of this. And, oh, you've got some products and services to sell. Fine, I'll sign on the dotted line, but take me to the next step in the journey because I would have paid you to hear that story. If they've kind of built them up, or you've built them up to this crescendo, what is that next steps in reality then? Because that's got to also be so motivating, hasn't it? There's got to be like no stone unturned there. It's got to be really powerful.
Yeah, you've got it so right. And that's why I call it prescribed next steps. Many sellers, junior sellers, will I go, hey, this has been a good discussion. What should we do next? And, you ask the buyer, they don't know. So their typical response is send me more information and we'll have some internal meetings and we'll get back to you. And then, the seller chases them and say, hey, have you met yet? Or no, not yet. Still reviewing. They haven't done anything. And then, after a while, it just dies on the vine. The bigger things moved on. CEO got canned. There's a new one, new initiative. Just time goes by. Horrible. Because you had a good dialogue. You made a case for change. Now, what are the next steps? So I did a project. This is my most stressful project in my career, but the sponsors of this project were Steve Ballmer, who now owns the LA Clippers, one of the professional basketball teams. Super hyper dude. I mean, oh my God, look out. And then, you'll know why he's a multi-billionaire, just on fire. But then also Mark Hurd, who was at the time CEO of Hewlett Packard. So they hired us to do go-to-market planning and narratives around 8 different solutions between HP and Microsoft. And it ended up being a recommendation for them to, jointly spend $375 million on marketing to bring those joint solutions, those 8 joint solutions to market. So what I did with each of the solution teams and these kind of the solution owners and the product people behind them, I asked them, hey, what are the next steps? When we've got an excited buyer, what do they do? And it was like, maybe, and it's like, okay, guys, not good enough. I want to hard code this. What are the next steps? Is it a meeting? Is it an assessment? Is it a business case? Is it a proof of concept? Is it references? What are the next steps that need to occur for that customer to come on board and for them to sign the dotted line and get going? And there are a few different things that we did to make this all successful. We took a peer-to-peer approach to getting the right prospects and the right buyers. So, we were, through the economic buyers at Microsoft and, or the business leaders at Microsoft and HP, we were doing a peer-to-peer talking to their counterparts or people of that caliber on the buying side, on the prospective client side. So that was one tactic that we took. But I still contend one of the best tactics we took was hard coding those next steps. And because of that, we had, these were multi-million-dollar, bets by that client to buy these big solutions from HP and Microsoft, big enterprise solutions. We had over a 50% connect rate, meaning the buyer bought when they went through the next steps. And it was beautiful. We won a award of the year for HP, et cetera, on that by the marketing people that sponsored bringing us in. They were the heroes. Funny enough, it was the Marketing Circle of the Year award for HP.
Wow.
So just
You've
the
hit it
power of
then.
those prescribed next steps, and just making the buying easy. And framing those next step offerings up. But it doesn't just happen on its own. What is an assessment? Well, we need a tool that assesses and a process for that. So you got to think deeply about each one of those next steps. Or we're going to do a workshop with the stakeholders. We're going to get all 20 of those guys into a room and do some magic there to make sure we've got consensus on the road ahead. Well, what's that workshop look like? Who's running it? And what are the requirements for it? So you got to kind of dig deeper to hard code a next step like that. But that's what we did, and that approach works. Most organizations don't do that I see. They wing it, and they get random results.
Yeah, there's a pattern here, isn't it? That I think I've heard you now say, Bruce, maybe about 4 or 5 times. Most organizations don't do this.
This obviously mastered by few.
Well, yeah, and this is where for me. And I think for me, this is where it gets really interesting, because this feels like then if you do take these approaches, if you do pay this extra attention, if you do go this extra deep with a potential prospect or existing customer, you can actually stifle the rest of the marketplace. Honestly, that they wouldn't. Why would anybody go anywhere else? This feels it's such a differentiator, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, a story that sizzles. You stand apart by doing this. But it's funny. Sometimes, Neil, I'll hear people say, "Bruce, this is so simple. It just seems normal." And I'm like going, "Are you doing it?" And they're, "Yeah, I think so." And I'm like going, "What problem are you solving in 4 or less words?" Okay, you can't answer it, can you? You just rattled off a whole bunch of challenges, but you have not named what I call the big ugly. You have not named that big problem. Got some work to do. So I mean, it's again deceptively simple, but I rarely see it.
So the most deceptively simple thing you can do here is to get Bruce's book. So how do people get hold of the book then, Bruce? How do they connect with you? What are the next steps? Let's prescribe the next steps for everybody listening to this.
Okay, yeah, if you're intrigued, I would recommend reading the book, and also, routinely I'll have people love the book, and then they have their management team read it and realize they've got work to do. You can get to the book off my website, inspireyourbuyers.com/books. It's on Amazon. It was a #1 bestseller. It's a best-selling book there in multiple formats: Kindle, Audible, and then paper and hard copy. Funny enough, that are getting way more popular these days. But that's a way to get the book and to interact directly with me. Off my website, you can schedule time with me if that's interesting and relevant to you. And also I'm on LinkedIn and quite responsive. So you can reach me at, it's BSCHEER on LinkedIn. That's the real Bruce.
The real Bruce. So if you want to connect with the real Bruce, and there is only really one Bruce.
Yeah,
from what I'm hearing here, this is a connection you need. So Bruce, this has been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I've been looking forward to this one, as you know, and I'm so grateful for your time and the amount of value that I think you're bringing to, sales, and I have to say, and marketing, because often we don't say that enough in marketing, that sales is bringing us value, but you certainly are, for sure. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll implore everybody to go and get a copy of that book, because it's really masterful, really special.
Well, thank you, Neil, for your service and all the value you're adding for your audience. Thanks for having me as a guest. I was glad to contribute.